hello, thank you very much for all coming here. First of all, a very, very good morning and thanks and welcome. Welcome here at DrupalJam 2022 Reconnect. My name is Emil Brok and I'm going to ask you first to reconnect because that's the theme of today. So I want you all to have a look at your shoes and tell your neighbor why you are wearing these shoes today. I give you 1 minute for this. Why are you wearing these shoes? Okay. You've all... Yeah, you haven't thought about this maybe, right? You haven't thought about why you're wearing these shoes. Thank you very much for connecting to each other, because connecting is something that we haven't been able to do, right, for the last 2 years. So here we are again, finally able to have an event like this. And not just here, we also have people at home. So thank you very much also all the people who joined in from their home or from their offices. I ask you to have a look at your shoes, and maybe it caught your eye that I am actually wearing quite eye-catching shoes. And this is a little bit of an introduction of myself, because I wear these shoes because I want to catch the eye of people that I talk to, of my audiences, but I also want to look business-ish. So therefore I chose this color, and also I work at a company called SUSE, a very, very cool open source company. Some of you might know it. Here is our big friend Giko, and as you can see, his color is quite in line with my shoes. Enough about me. We're going to talk about this event and about the great lineup we have for you here today. We have more than 300 tickets sold for this event. So again, it's really great to have the possibility to have an event like this again. And yeah, it's really great. I'm really happy and enthusiastic to have you all here. An event like this, of course, is not possible without sponsors. So I first want to have your attention for our sponsor video. Here we go.
We gaan op weg naar de I.O. innovatietruck. Die hebben wij destijds gekocht en ingericht. Omdat we vinden dat als je aan innovatie doet, dat doe je eigenlijk op een zolderkamertje. Maar we werken voor grote corporates en daar zijn natuurlijk geen zolderkamertjes. Dus vandaar dat we de truck hebben gekocht, helemaal in hebben gericht. Zodat je hier workshops en alles rond innovatie kan doen. En bij voorkeur zetten we die ook op de parkeerplaats om zo wat extra aandacht te krijgen. Dus de innovatietruck van I.O. De ruimte is dus helemaal ingericht om workshops te doen. Ik merk ook dat mensen echt komen kijken als we hier workshops aan het doen zijn, om te zien wat er gebeurt. Dus het levert altijd wat extra aandacht.
Wow, okay, so thank you very much, I.O., for sponsoring this event. What do we have for you today? Besides great sponsor videos like this, we have a great keynote coming up straight after my introduction, keynote by Preston. We have the newest update on the state of Drupal 10 for you. We have talk shows, we have breakout sessions, and then, of course, as you all know, at the end of the day, there is the pub quiz by Bert Boerland. Aren't you all looking forward to that? So, let's have a look. Yeah, there are some housekeeping rules and things as well. There is Wi-Fi, and I believe it's somewhere visible. Otherwise, we'll tell you later how it works with the Wi-Fi, but I believe it was not that complicated. There is a code of conduct active right now, and you might have noticed, but actually we are being filmed. So if you don't want to be filmed, that's a bit of a challenge. But if you don't want to be photographed, there was the possibility to wear white lanyards, and then we will do as much as we can to keep you out of the pictures. Of course, if you want to say something about this event on the socials, please use #DrupalJam. Easy as that. Now, it's my honor to introduce to the stage Barry van der Meij, the chair of the Dutch Drupal Association. Barry, where are you? Ah, there you are. Hey.
Good morning. My name is Barry. Since this year, I may be the chair of the Dutch Drupal organization. And well, it's really great to have you all here in this area together. The last 2 years, you've been all staying connected. The last 2 online sessions of DrupalJam have been great, but well, probably today is going to be even better. So thank you all for staying connected as a community, because that's what we are in the end. So applause for yourself. As you might know, the organization of an event like this within the Dutch Drupal organization, and well, the people which are on the slide right now have spent a tremendous amount of energy in organizing this event. And those were weekends in the nights, receiving emails at 1:30 a.m. in the night for all the last things, for ordering stuff, for organizing all the talks, for well, combining the program we have today. So I think these 5 people really did a tremendous job in doing this today, and it was all voluntary. So a big thank you to these 5 people who've made this possible. Thank you very much. And while organizing this, a venue like this, having some drinks, something to eat, that costs a lot of money. So without our sponsors and without you buying all the tickets, this wouldn't have been possible. So I'd like to thank IO, Limoen Groen finalist, and Swiss for being IO as a platinum sponsor, and the other 3 as a gold sponsor for this event. And we also have some silver sponsors, as where Media Monks is the sponsor for our pub quiz at the end of the day. So that was basically my talk. I was really told to keep it under 3 minutes, so I hope I managed to. And I think I give the word back to Emile right now. So have a very good day, enjoy, and as you said, connect with each other and well, enjoy. Thank you.
You're welcome, Barry. Big hand for Barry. Thank you very much. As Barry said, we have sponsors. So here are 2 more videos of 2 elder sponsors.
Mooie projecten met impact. Voor onderwijs werken we veel en maatschappelijke organisaties. Dus dat geeft eigenlijk heel veel voldoening aan mijn dag. Kom gezellig werken bij Finalist.
All right, thank you very much. We are all here, and we're all able here to talk about whatever we want. We can live in peace, but as we all know, if you jump into your car and you drive about 15 hours east of here, we are in Ukraine, and that situation is not something you want to just let go like that. So therefore we have later on a talk by Lenny Moskalik, but Lenny is already here to give you a short feeling of the situation over in Ukraine. Lenny, please come to the stage.
Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. First of all, I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you today. And I'm honored to represent the Ukrainian community at DrupalJam. What will we be talking about today during my session? As you know, it's called "And Then I Saw Ukraine." We will be talking a little bit about bravery and the meaning of this word, the meaning that it gained over the last 3 months. We will be talking about the lessons we learned recently about life, about changes in our life, about the adaptation process. And yeah, I hope that I will be able to share with you something new, and as well as the ways to help to support Drupal community of Ukraine.
Wow, fantastic to have you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Look forward to your talk. So now we're going to watch the video of the DrupalCon in Europe. Here we go.
Are you ready for the largest Drupal event in Europe? After the success of DrupalCon Amsterdam and DrupalCon Europe Virtual, the organizing committee, Kwony Tumblr Congress, and its wonderful team of volunteers are excited to gather again in person in Prague. What to expect? Inspiring keynotes including Dries Note, hundreds of sessions and BOFs, hours of contribution to Drupal, meetings with sponsors and exhibitors, and a lot of fun with your Drupal friends. Mark your calendar, 20 to 23 September, O2 Universum, Prague. The city of 100 spires is waiting for you. Registration is now open. More info on the event website.
So right after summer, we have the possibility again to meet each other in person, and that will be in Prague. So look forward to see you all there again. I lost count now. Do we have one more sponsor video to go? Or I see a finger there, but it's in the... Yes? One more. Here we go. All right. Well, thank you very much, Swiss, as well, for sponsoring this event here today. Next, I'm going to announce the keynote to you, the first keynote. And after I did that, we will have a quickly rebuild. You stay seated. You're all can stay there. We'll just quickly put the laptop up there, and then we will start with the keynote. The keynote by Preston, of course. And Preston, when he heard about having the possibility to talk here on the Dutch event, he said, "Oh, that's cool, because I speak Dutch, so I can do my presentation in Dutch." But then he heard that we actually have an international audience and that we do it in English. So I still hope that he is willing and able to have this talk for you. He's going to talk about a tongue breaker for me, democratizing the headless CMS. So he will discuss how you can democratize your headless CMS, and not just for you, for a few people, but for everyone. So right after we have rebuilt the stage for you, stay seated, and Preston will take the stage. Thank you very much for your time.
Let me check. Yes, the power is on. Let's see. Yep, it's on.
Like this now.
Okay, thank you.
We'll give you 10 seconds. Yep.
Test, test. Hello everyone. Hele goedemorgen allemaal. Hoe gaat het? Alles goed? Ja? Hartelijk welkom op deze conferentie DrupalJam van 2022. Ongelooflijk, ja. Mijn naam is Preston en ik ben hier in Utrecht voor de tweede keer geweest. Wel, eigenlijk in Marsen voor de eerste keer. En hartelijk welkom. So in English now, in het Engels, thank you all for being here today. Welcome to another edition of DrupalJam this year, 2022. It's hard to believe. And also, thank you so much for all the amazing work here to get all the sponsors and organizing this first in-person DrupalJam in quite some time. My name is Preston and I'm here today to talk about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart and that I've been working on for quite some time. So I want to talk about a couple of things first and foremost, a few housekeeping items. First, I organize a conference as well in New York City. We have a conference called Decoupled Days, which is the only headless CMS conference that is nonprofit, volunteer-led, open source in the entire world. We're having our first in-person edition of this conference, again, from August 17th through 18th in New York City. Our call for papers is open until, I believe, around 9 a.m. Dutch time tomorrow morning. So if you'd like to get your submission in, please feel free to submit a session. We'd love to have your talk, and we'd love to welcome you to New York City for our first in-person Decoupled Days in several years. Also, I've written several books. I spent my time during the pandemic some would say wisely, some would say very poorly. That is to say, I wrote 2 different books. The first is a book about voice content and usability. And actually, there's a lot of Drupal in this book. So if you work with Drupal and if you're interested in voice interfaces and chatbot design and voice bot design and its connection to Drupal, this book may be interesting for you, especially from the UX and design side of things. I also wrote during the pandemic a book called Gatsby, the Definitive Guide. If you work with, how many people here work with headless Drupal, decoupled Drupal? Okay, quite a few, good. So Gatsby.js is a framework that's often used with decoupled Drupal, and I've written the first ever comprehensive guide to Gatsby.js. That's available right now on bookshelves from O'Reilly. And then, of course, I have another book that's been out for some time now, Decoupled Drupal in Practice, for those of you who are interested in learning about this new paradigm of Drupal that involves working with things that go well beyond the traditional Drupal website. So I want to talk about something that is important today because it has to do with Drupal's past, with Drupal's present, and with Drupal's future. As many of you know, there's been a lot of churn, a lot of change, a lot of evolution, a lot of innovation in the CMS world and in the CMS market. And many of you probably know at this point as well that decoupled Drupal is now, for many developers, the preferred way to build decoupled Drupal architectures. How many of you here are developers here? Okay, mostly everybody. Okay. How many people here are not developers and are marketing professionals, CEOs, CMOs, UX designers, accessibility testers, researchers? Okay, great. So this presentation is about how most of us in this room can make your lives easier. So what I want to talk about today is what the big deal is about headless CMS from the perspective of not only developers, but also for the wider landscape of what CMSs are all about. But I also want to talk about some of the dangers and some of the hazards and some of the risks behind this evolution towards headless CMS, behind this evolution towards decoupled Drupal, a topic I've written about for quite some time. And then I want to talk about one big trend happening right now. Currently in the web development market, in general in the technology world, there's been a lot of motion and momentum towards what's called low-code or democratized or citizen-led design and development. What that means is and I'm sorry for all the developers here in the room, that means that developers shouldn't be relied upon or depended on to do things that marketing teams and content teams and people who are responsible for all of these other functions should be able to do from the very get-go of any web project. I want to talk a little bit about a new concept that I've been working on for some time that will be familiar to those of you who know about continuous deployment and CI/CD. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about how we're solving some of these issues at Oracle and to challenge the Drupal community as well together to see if we can come up with something interesting as well. So legacy web content management is a really pejorative term. But I'm using that term because it really refers to the way that many of us think of content management systems as it was 5 to 10 years ago. It's web biased, it's page based, which means that every single time we go into the Drupal CMS, we're editing, which is, for all intents and purposes, what is a page? A web page that is rooted in the paradigms of the web. But omnichannel content management has to be agnostic. It can't rely on just the web. It has to be pageless. And this is something we often like to say at Oracle. It has to be completely free of the tethers to the page and this reliance on the page that so many of our websites have depended upon for many, many years now. And it's a very hard bias for us to get out of. For many people in the industry, the answer is simply to go completely headless. And if you've heard of some of the new headless CMSs that have come out on the market, a lot of them don't actually have pages at all and don't have any page-based models whatsoever. But I don't necessarily believe that this notion that headless CMSs, where you only have content managed as data, I don't think that that is the once and for all right way forward. I think there's a middle path that will make everything easier for all teams who are involved in the picture. It also doesn't mean that hybrid headless is the right way forward. Drupal, for example, is a hybrid headless content management system. What that means is that we have not only the means to have a site builder, a what you see is what you get, or WYSIWYG approach to designing pages and designing our website, but also a headless approach, which allows us to use Drupal solely as a data store or a content repository for various other applications and digital experiences that we might be building. But here's the thing. One of the big reasons why Drupal was so successful was that Drupal invented low-code before low-code was even really a thing, before low-code was even something that existed in the CMS world. Drupal was among the very first content management systems to say, well, hey, we've got great developers who know PHP, but we need to be able to let people who are not PHP developers, who can't write themes, who can't write modules, understand how they can interact with a CMS in compelling ways. So in the same way that we have enabled a low-code web CMS in the Drupal ecosystem, we have to figure out, before it's too late, how to enable low-code headless and low-code omnichannel for those of us who work with CMSs today that are experiencing heavy demands and completely different worldviews from those that we had before. And there's a simple fact today. And this is a controversial statement. A lot of the headless CMS vendors out there are probably going to be sending me hate mail after this for saying this. But headless CMSs at their core remain for developers and no one else. And I'm sorry, but it's true. Let's talk about why. Well, the reason why is that we've come from a world where we've been building for screens for so long, and we're still in a world where we build for screens. We build for websites, we build for mobile applications, we build for tablets, we build for all of these different interactive experiences that are fundamentally rooted in this very simple landscape. But the problem is, of course, that we're growing beyond this context, and we now have a lot of other experiences that we have to build for. And that's why, of course, the founder of the Drupal project, Dries Buytaert, said, we have to build ambitious digital experiences based on Drupal. Web content, of course, is something that's very simple. It's hub and spoke, it's linked, it's all based on a certain structure that we're very used to, a networked structure that we're very used to as developers, as designers, as content editors, as those who work for our clients and for the CMS market in general. But things are changing very quickly. And what that means is that a lot of the content that we now have is no longer appropriate for the website or the tablet or the mobile application. One great example of this is voice content, where we have to deliver voice information to smart speakers like Amazon Alexa or the Google Home or other similar devices that don't have a screen at all. We also have to deal with the fact that we're moving towards a world where we have immersive content increasingly as well. More and more these days, it's not so much just a matter of enabling these screen-based digital experiences, it's also about enabling a physically rooted and immersively rooted landscape where we can interact with our digital lives in the comfort of our own devices and of course in our environment without ever having to consult a computer or a smartphone for some of these things that we've always been reliant on. But here's the question. One of the things that headless CMSs often say, and one of the things that I would say is a bit of headless CMS propaganda, is that, well, you don't need to have a low-code web CMS or any low-code at all to be able to create these headless CMS experiences that are based on this omni-channel idea of, well, here's digital signage, here's augmented reality, here's virtual reality, here's voice interfaces, here's chatbots, and so on and so forth. That's great. But here's the question that I have for all of you. And the question that I want to pose for every single person who works in the CMS world today, which is, why is it that we had this amazing low-code revolution for web CMS, but we think that it's impossible to do the same for a headless CMS and for the future of the CMS as it stands today? Because we know the future of the CMS is beyond the web. We know the future of the CMS is off web. But how do we actually enable and how do we understand as a market, as an industry, as a world, that this leaves behind so many of our most important users, of our most important customers? And of course, those are the people that we're building our experiences for in the first place and in the second place. The first place, of course, being our customers, but also those who need to be able to administer, edit, manage, maintain, proofread, publish, preview, approve, and review all of the content that we need them to produce for their purposes. So why is it that we can't achieve this low-code kind of experience? Well, there's a lot of reasons why, and I want to dig very briefly into some of the technical reasons why. And why is it that we have these custom CMS workflows that everyone builds instead of established patterns that we can all turn back on? Well, there's two big reasons why we have this issue. The first is that, unfortunately, we have a new separation of concerns architecturally within the CMS that makes things very challenging. One of the biggest issues today is that we now have this notion of proudly rendered elsewhere, which is that a lot of the content that we now produce is meant to be displayed elsewhere, is not meant to be for the content management system itself. We're not actually displaying it for a website that we have control over. Also, one of the big challenges we have today is that not only do we have all of these different environments to serve content to, we also have a million technologies that we have to serve this content to, in addition to the traditional front end that we've built in terms of our Drupal themes and our Drupal modules and our Drupal sites. And one of the sad truths today, sad or actually great opportunities of today, is that JavaScript-driven rendering, which is the new approach to front-end development, that is now superseding a lot of the traditional CMS approaches that we have today. And just to dive into this a little bit, what's happening is that we're seeing the rendering of a lot of our data move down stack. And what I mean by that is increasingly we're seeing a situation where more and more of our front-end developers and more of our JavaScript developers who are building on headless CMS want to see more and more control and more flexibility over how that rendering occurs in the overarching full stack pipeline that they have. Now, the other problem we have as well is that now we have the notion of APIs. And for those of you who are a little bit new to the notion of headless CMS, an API is essentially an exposure layer for data to a variety of different applications. So think of it like this. If you have a virtual reality headset, if you have a digital sign, if you have an information kiosk like here in Utrecht Centraal, right? If you have, for example, some kind of a voice interface, the way that that information travels to those interfaces is through an API that the content management system is responsible for. But of course, today, one of the big issues is that in the past, the CMS had a very simple separation of concerns. Think about it. In Drupal, it was very simple. You have your data that's in a database, and you have your front-end theme, your Drupal front-end, which is entirely driven by its own presentation layer. But today, that's very much different, and this is why we have the term hybrid headless. The hybrid, of course, being the fact that it can do both things at once. It can be its own presentation layer, and it can also serve other presentation layers and other front ends. So that was a very short summary of one of the things that is very important to the way in which Drupal works today, especially in a headless fashion. But we also have a second demand, and this is the other side of the tension that I think is very important to highlight. We have, as developers now, today, a very new landscape. We have to build for these environments where we're now looking at new ways to approach the technologies that we've long looked at for many years now. We're not just writing in PHP anymore, writing in JavaScript, especially those of us who are on the front end. And by the same token, a lot of us are not just focused on those single languages anymore and those single idioms anymore on the marketing side of things and on the digital environment side of things. We're now looking at a situation where many of us who work for agencies, who work for consultancies, who are designers, have to build and think and plan for digital experiences that go well beyond the website. And many of us today, I imagine, especially given how much the coronavirus pandemic has changed things, we're now looking at a lot of the things and a lot of the trends that are ongoing. For example, consider the fact that smart speaker sales and uses of virtual reality headsets like the Oculus Rift, all of those devices have skyrocketed in sales and adoption over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this means that very soon, a lot of us who are owners of agencies, a lot of us who work with our design partners, a lot of us who are building for our customers are going to face these demands as well. But of course, we know that Drupal can be the hub and can be the destination, and can be the root of all of these things. We know that CMSs in general can be the foundation of a lot of these omni-channel ecosystems that exist. But there's a big issue, right, which is that we have the traditional CMS, the monolithic CMS, and we also have hybrid headless and headless. Here's the thing that I want to pose today as a big argument for what I'm about to propose, which is that headless CMSs are really great if you are a developer, but they're not so great if you need to have that low-code approach to WYSIWYG design, to drag-and-drop layout building, and especially for some of the simpler aspects of content editing and content maintenance that we have today, like approval and review, like preview and publishing. Now, one of the things that we see here is that because there's no built-in front end, we have a very different model. And the argument that I'm going to make today is that this picture right here is actually misleading. And I'll tell you a little bit about why that is. A hybrid headless CMS like Drupal and like Oracle Content Management has the benefit of having both options. You have the built-in website that allows you to use all the tools that we're used to today. And it also has the ability to serve all these different consumers, all these clients. JavaScript, mobile applications, voice interfaces, AR interfaces, what have you. And these are all things that are great, but here's the problem that I see today, which is that I think up until now, Drupal and other CMSs have done really well with the web audience, have done really well with serving that single channel, which is the web. But are the headless CMSs that are emerging today truly optimal for the omni-channel needs of the future? Can you easily preview and publish content that is intended for a voice interface? Can you easily approve and review and on your own deploy and provision content and experiences that are going to an AR interface or a virtual reality headset or a digital sign? That's, I think, one of the big challenges of today, because what I hear day in and day out when I speak to a lot of the people I've worked with, clients that I've worked with in India, in Japan, is that this is the chief complaint that every single client has, every single customer has when they look at a CMS is, yeah, the website's fine. The website we can manage, that's easy. It's been easy peasy for many years now. But we built a voice interface, we built a chatbot, we built a digital sign, we built a VR interface, and now we've built these unmaintainable boondongles that have absolutely nothing to do with the way that we manage our website. Why is that? Why is that? Our content teams are those who are responsible for GDPR compliance, are those who are responsible for preview and approval, are those who are responsible for making sure that they can publish their own content and not have to tap on the shoulder of us developers here in the room all the time. Are they now disenfranchised and now no longer able to do what they need to do? And that's fundamentally what I mean about democratization. We have to figure out a way to reintroduce this missing functionality that is now becoming a fever pitch of discontent among content teams so that we can enable an omni-channel CMS for the future. This is what I argue for today. We should no longer consider all of these other presentation layers to be on their own little islands, to be orphaned over here, to be these completely isolated artifacts that we won't touch ever again, because they're impossible for our content teams to maintain. Headless is here to stay, but that doesn't mean that the way that headless works today should be how it works in the future. What I argue for is what I call a distributed approach to CMS. The distributed content management system is one that understands from the very beginning, from the very inception of any content ecosystem, that every consumer should be treated equal, and every single consumer should be a first-class citizen. That means that we should treat the website equally with a digital sign, equally with a augmented reality interface, equally with a virtual reality interface, equally with a voice interface. And that is our next challenge as CMS practitioners, as CMS developers, as people who work in this CMS landscape, is how to figure out how we can make sure that we don't leave all the people behind who were able to work with websites before. Now, I already can hear a lot of protests because there's a lot of unanswered questions here, and I'll jump into those in just a second. Because here's the question that I want to ask from a technical perspective as well. Is this separation of concerns that I've identified before between the headless consumers and the content repository, between the front end and the back end of Drupal, is that truly sacred? Is that truly sacrosanct? Can we get away from some of these architectural digressions in favor of understanding the fact that for our content teams and for those of us who don't develop on a daily basis, who don't manage our CI/CD pipelines, this separation of concerns is immaterial. This inability to create a voice interface on the fly and preview that content for that voice interface in our CMS, that is immaterial. That is not something that our clients care about. Our clients don't have any sort of idea what it is that's going on under the hood, and they don't really care, and they shouldn't have to care. But because of the way that we have now gotten into this world where the website is the all-important focus and now all of the other consumers, all these other applications are now left by the wayside, that is now becoming a very big issue for all of us on content teams. Because we as developers don't just collaborate with other developers. We collaborate with marketing teams, with editors. We collaborate with a variety of different personas. And the truth of the matter is that marketers and content editors continue to want control over those non-web, off-web experiences. Because here's the big truth about content management today, is that if you think about all the multiplicity, the myriad digital experiences that we have today, well, if you're a designer, if you're a content editor, fundamentally you can really only have that deep-seated control over things like websites and responsive design. Meanwhile, developers have control over everything else. And this is a problem that is really common across the industry today. About 5 years ago, I spoke at DrupalCon Vienna, and I presented this graph. And this graph has since gotten a lot of attention. A lot of people have commented on this. It's been picked up by some of the other CMS folks in the room. And one of the things that I noted with this is that, well, what's better for developers, what's better for marketers has always been what has made Drupal's equilibrium possible. Being better for marketers and being better for developers means that we're better for our customers, we're better for our users. But as we see more and more of these needs arise around things that are not necessarily just the website, we see how Drupal and other CMSs have now become harder and harder for marketers to work with, and harder for users to work with, and harder for content editors to work with. I since adapted this to this diagram right here, which shows how when we value all of the different personas that we work with in the CMS, the site builder, the content editor, the QA tester, the accessibility specialist, the usability researcher, the marketing professional, all of these different personas, we have to create this equilibrium that lasts for longer than we have today. And because this is the big journey that we all face, is that on the journey from web to omnichannel content, we're now seeing developer teams who are very happy, they're ecstatic, right? We can now work in React.js, we can now build in React Native and create all of these different applications using cross-platform frameworks. But content teams are increasingly unhappy because fundamentally, these experiences, these digital environments are black boxes to them. There is no way for us to preview this content in that application easily, just as easily as we could with Drupal. And here's the question that I want to ask is, why can't we preview just as easily as we can a Drupal website? Why can't we preview a voice application or an augmented reality interface within the context of our CMS? And why can't we move across workflow states in our content items and in our Drupal nodes so that we can preview it in these environments without the aid of a developer? And this is why we need a new grand compromise in CMS. So CMSs have to restore the balance. And what I mean by that is the historic web-only CMS was in this very balanced location here. It was in this kind of nice little area where you had an amazing amount of developer flexibility and an amazing amount of editorial flexibility as well. But the market has since moved in a direction where we have a headless CMS landscape, and that is really great for developers, but not so great for editors. We have now the monolithic CMS model, which is great for editors, not so great for developers, especially as we move more towards these JavaScript-driven paradigms. What we need, however, is to move to a landscape where we acknowledge that this is the truth and acknowledge that we have to flatten out these lines. We have to flatten out these arrows such that we have the ability for both editors and developers to be happy in the long run. And eventually, by doing so, we'll be able to make sure that everyone is happy no matter who they are, across all of the different experiences that we have to build, not just for responsive websites and not just for the Drupal sites that we know today. And this is the fundamental problem that content management faces right now. Because the CMS has always been built on this uneasy alliance between personas. But the problem is today, not all CMS personas are treated equal anymore. And that's one of the big issues that we have to address within the headless CMS landscape. The editorial control that we had before, the ability to preview, approve, publish on our own, is no longer possible everywhere. It's no longer possible for all the different digital experiences that we have to build for. But we have to enable some level of that low-code, citizen-led democratization for editors. Now, I'm not saying that what we need is a Wix or a Webflow for digital signage or for virtual reality, even though there are tools like that out there. But what I'm saying is that we, as CMS practitioners, need to figure out a way to enable these editors to do at least some of what they were able to do in the past. So let's talk about how to do that. The thing is that a CMS, I believe, is not something that is just a content repository. The headless CMS manufacturers, the headless CMS vendors will argue that it should just be a content repository that hangs out. But I think that we in the Drupal ecosystem, we in many of these CMS worlds, we at Oracle Content Management as well, we in Sitecore and WordPress and all these worlds, we've made an investment in a different definition of the CMS, which is not as a content store, not as a database, but as a conjunct of workflows that achieve a happy medium between our developer teams and every other team that's involved in content. The sociologist and philosopher Abraham Maslow has the hierarchy of needs, and many of you have probably seen this before. There's also a lot of memes that involve this particular pyramid right here. And the hierarchy of needs is a very simple model to understand what are the basic needs that we as users have, and what are the less important needs that we have further up. One example of this is that for a lot of our digital experiences, and this is where a lot of those questions you probably had earlier come into play. Now, we have to acknowledge the fact that a lot of these things that I've argued for that are present in the website, like in-place editing, layout building, drag and drop components, those are things that work well for websites. But those might not be things that work as well for WebXR interfaces that do virtual reality or augmented reality. They might not work as well for digital signage based on the IoT platform from Amazon Web Services. They might not work so well for a Dialogflow built voice interface. But certain things that we were able to do before are things that we should focus on today. And why this no longer works is that we have certain minimum thresholds that we have to reach for these marketers. Certain things that we want to make sure that our marketing teams and our editorial teams can still achieve. And this headless CMS model no longer works because a lot of these things are basically brought down to zero. And a lot of the things that we've gotten used to as website administrators, as website builders from the editorial perspective are no longer things that we can actually achieve. But we have to bring it back to the level, to some kind of a threshold where we know that our editorial teams will be happy. And the thing is, that depends for every different team, right? It depends also on the technology as well. And we have certain limitations architecturally, we have certain limitations technologically, we have certain limitations from a user perspective as well that make this challenging. But I believe very strongly that at the very base level, the very, very basic level, one of the core functions of Drupal has always been, let me preview my content, my unpublished content, in the website right there next to my editorial interface. Let me see it so that I can see it before I publish it live. And this has been a central tenet, a central foundation of every single CMS that exists out there today. A lot of people are trying to climb this in various regards, and a lot of these vendors are trying to do this particularly from the standpoint of where they are in terms of the framework landscape, where they are in terms of the headless CMS landscape. One example of this is Tina CMS. Tina CMS is a headless CMS out there that aims to do side-by-side editing alongside your actual website display. But here's the problem, right? One of the issues of that is that there isn't really a way for us to do that for every single possible conventional or non-conventional user experience that's out there. And we have to consider the fact that, well, there are some user experiences that don't lend themselves well to displaying on a web CMS like Drupal. And that's why what we need to focus on is not so much this notion of completely involving and enveloping these other digital experiences again. It's about what I call continuous proofing. Because there are certain marketing needs, as we've seen, that are non-negotiable. Preview is one, right? Content approval is one, right? What can we do to enable those non-negotiable needs? We know that neither headless nor hybrid headless is that silver bullet, is that thing, that holy grail that will solve all these problems. We need a new grand compromise. And what I mean is that the CMS of the late 2000s and the early 2010s, that's a mistake there, is that it was easy to do these things for developers, it was easy to do these things for marketers, it was easy to do these things for content editors. And we can still figure out ways to enable graceful workflows that allow for some of the things that we have in place today to still actually occur. So our new grand compromise, the new CMS, the new landscape for the CMS is going to involve novel workflows, novel approaches, and novel architectures. And we see a lot of the headless CMSs moving in this direction. We also see Drupal moving in this direction. We also see a lot of other CMSs like Oracle Content Management moving in this direction. And one thing that has really changed the developer experience forever is one term called continuous integration and continuous deployment, CI/CD. The basic cornerstone of continuous deployment is that whenever I add a new feature, I edit some code, I add a line of code, or I want to add a new component, or I want to add a new module, or add a new theme, as soon as I put that code up in the air, everything gets updated across all of the different things that we need to have on the website. Our development-only website, our QA website, our staging website for preview, also our production website, our live website. But we need something similar for editors that's easy for somebody who is an editor to do. What I'm recommending is not so much this notion of just code-driven updates or code-driven live changes or code-driven deployment. I'm also arguing for content-driven deployment, because all of these things that we can do today when we add a line of code should also be possible when an editor or our CMO adds a line of content to an article or adds a line of content to a Drupal node. Because there's two types of headless development. There's marketing-led headless development, which says, well, I don't want to lose what I already have in my CMS that exists already. But developers say, oh, well, we can go ahead and build that out for you, this custom workflow that will actually break within only a few months. But there's a different way to do this, right? And one of the biggest issues that every headless CMS team faces, and I've dealt with this many, many times across my many years of working with headless CMS, is great, CI/CD works really well, but how do you actually automate that process in a repeatable way as opposed to doing it every single time for a content editor who needs to be able to see a preview of that content that they just pushed up to the CMS? How do they actually see that without having to tap on your shoulder, without having to actually consult you for help with that support? Because one of the biggest issues with continuous deployment is, unless you have a very complex network of webhooks, a very complex infrastructure that's already been set up, and this is usually not repeatable across all of your different implementations over the course of time, you have to do a lot of manual, low friction or high friction collaboration between different silos, where you're going to slack a link that's a preview link. But then what happens is you've got these race conditions where a developer has updated code, a content editor has updated content, and now you've got all these different things going back and forth, and the inability to make any rhyme or reason or make any sense of how those things are actually interacting with each other. What I mean by continuous proofing is that just as today we have the ability to preview and publish content within Drupal and within Oracle Content Management, we have to be able to create this same workflow for any of the other applications that we might have. Now, what about for those user experiences that don't actually have a web version? We can't actually produce a written or a web or a screen-based version of these things. Well, the great news is that there are tools available right now that allow for us to create these consumers and recreate these consumers and emulate these consumers within something like a side-by-side live preview interface. One example of this, of course, is React Native's web emulator, React Native Web, or also the fact that you can use WebXR to export from Unity and have a virtual reality interface that you can look at within the context of your browser. This is the way that we have to move in the future, because fundamentally what's happening right now is that we're making content changes as editors, and they're going to some black box that we can't see. They're going to some black box that we can't control or have any insight into. So to solve this initial problem, I don't believe that we have to have control over all the rendering. I don't believe that we have to have control over all the presentation. But what I do believe is that we need to have some aspect of control over the orchestration, over the infrastructure. And yes, I am arguing for CMSs to get more involved and get more opinionated in how that infrastructure works. Continuous proofing means continuous deployment for content editors. It means CI/CD pipelines for our editorial teams, for our marketing teams, who need to be able to do the exact same richness and myriad functions that we do as developers on their own without our aid and without our support. My dream is that in the future we can get to a point where any editor can set up a digital sign or a voice interface or a chatbot or a VR headset experience without ever having to tap on the shoulder of a developer in a CMS like Drupal and be able to preview their content, be able to do everything they need to do in terms of those content workflows right in the context of the CMS. That is the CMS of the future. That is where the CMS should be headed. Because continuous deployment means that instead of having all this manual back and forth, we can automate a lot of these processes and make a lot of these things simpler for a lot of our users. So I want to end here very briefly with just a quick notion of how we're solving these issues at Oracle. Very quickly, Oracle Content Management, obviously we are a proprietary closed source CMS, but we recently re-architected the CMS from scratch, and we also started to build an open source ecosystem. Oracle has historically not been a very good open source citizen, but we are gradually evolving that. We now have a very large developer ecosystem around our hybrid headless CMS. We built it from scratch using our API-first architecture. We now have GraphQL capabilities as well. And we've also built rich integrations for CI/CD, for webhooks, for this sort of automated orchestration that allows for anyone who's not a developer to be able to do these workflows that I just mentioned. So we've built a new CMS that includes this notion of CI/CD not only for developers, but also for content editors as well. Now what I want to do is I want to show you a quick demonstration of some work in progress, which is our Oracle Content Management system allowing for a user to go into their asset, which in Drupal is a node. That's the that's the same term across both of these ecosystems. Making a change and then being able to trigger a new deployment of a React application on their own, and also to preview it on their own without ever having to consult a developer or having to work around very confusing webhooks or very confusing gobbledygook URLs in the URL bar. As you can see here, the user has now saved this particular content item. Now we're going to go into our headless React application here, and we're going to check our status right now. And as you can see, this particular React application is hosted on Heroku, but it could be hosted anywhere. And this is the key aspect of what we're talking about. A lot of the other headless CMSs, they want you to use, let's say, a preferred hosting ecosystem or preferred infrastructure. But at Oracle, we're making an investment in deciding that this isn't actually necessary. You can go with any hosting environment you want, any infrastructure you want to do. Now, as you can see here, when we navigate to this staging URL, you can see now that once this is now completed, the text will be updated and the user will be able to see this. This is the kind of work that we want to see happen more and more. And there is great examples of this work happening right now as well. For example, the Gatsby Live Preview module is an example of this, which I had the privilege to work on a little bit when I was at Gatsby. But I believe that we need to evolve past a single front-end focused approach to an approach where we can actually have a lot of this work happen within the CMS and not in this infrastructure that consists of black boxes. Sorry, there's a lot of narration here. That's why there's, I cut out the audio, so there's some narration here. But if we go to the preview, you can see now that the text has been updated, and this can take place entirely within the context of the CMS. So to take this to this logical conclusion, imagine, for example, that instead of this React application, you see a virtual reality interface. You see a digital sign. You see something like a chatbot. You see something like a voice interface, like a chatbot written version of something like an Alexa device. Wonderful. So some key takeaways before I finish up here. I believe that headless CMSs haven't done enough to bridge the gap. I believe that headless CMSs are insufficient for the omni-channel landscape that we face today, not only as developers, but also as content teams, because we as developers are not the only people in the room. We have to enable our CMSs to work for everybody and for every possible destination of content. We need a new grand compromise that leaves no persona behind, and we need to give our developers and our content teams the workflows that enable them both to succeed, that empower them both to succeed. That's what fundamentally democratizing the headless CMS means. Continuous proofing, not just CI/CD, continuous proofing for our content teams as well. Because the CMS's next challenge, our next challenge in this world, is to restore the equilibrium that first drove us to success. Now, I want to end here with a personal story. And as many of you know, I have worked in the Drupal community for a very long time. I've been in the Drupal community for 15 years. And it's been a very, very wonderful journey in open source and in the Drupal community. But I want to share a brief story that I think highlights the importance of why open source exists, why it connects us across different countries, across different cultures, why it's so important to the future of Drupal, and why I believe that there's an opportunity for an open source solution to everything that I've described. About 10 years ago, I decided to embark on a journey to learn the Russian language. And if you know the Russian language, it's a very, very challenging language. All Slavic languages are very challenging. And to practice my Russian, I decided to log onto a website, this little social network called VKontakte, which is VK, VKontakte. And it's the network, the social network that's used across a variety of different countries that are Slavic speaking. And on that profile, I decided to put a little hashtag, a tag that said Drupal in the Cyrillic alphabet. Very soon after that, I was reached out to by a person named Vasil, who is now a dear friend of mine, based in Ukraine, who wanted to talk about Drupal. He had just started learning PHP. He said, hey, I see you work in Drupal. I see you are working in Drupal. We started talking. We started actually really interacting very often. This person I decided to meet online. And after some time, he went for a graduate studies program in Poland, where we actually met in person and became friends to this day. This is the power of what open source can do. This is what open source does. And today, Vasyl, of course, and his family are in Ukraine today, where things are, as we've seen, extremely challenging and extremely difficult. So I want to end today with a personal note and a personal story to share with you the power of open source and why events like DrupalJam exist, why ecosystems like Drupal exist. And of course, to say, Slava Ukraini, Героям Slava, Chlory an Ukraina, and Niet Vanya. With that, thank you very much. I'll share some resources. Thank you to the Drupal Association here in the Netherlands. And also thank you to all of you for being here today and for joining me in this keynote. Thank you. Thank you all.
Wow. Thank you so much. Really, such a cool visionary talk, and then closing with the essence of open source. That's really close to my heart as well. There is time for one question. Who's the first one who? Yeah, there. Can you please ask your question?
Thanks, Preston, for your talk. It was amazing. In Drupal, we store lots of different types of data. It's like what we call a hybrid CMS. And in all your diagrams, there is just this one blob, and it says data. But shouldn't we start making a separation in that, saying that this is content data and this is presentational data, and maybe there's more structural data about navigation and stuff? Because for some channels, it's really important to just manage the content, and for others, there's layout involved, for instance, or colors or other things. Can we still maintain that there is just one blob of data and that's it?
Can you answer so that the people at home also understand the question?
Yes, so this was a very good question, thank you. Yes. The question was about data, and of course my diagram was oversimplistic. I wanted to make it for a wider audience. But the question was, shouldn't we start in journeying towards this world by splitting our data up into two different kinds of data, not only structured data, which is our content, but also presentational data, things like layout, navigation, things of that nature. I hope I'm summarizing the question correctly. So that's the thing. This is a really interesting question, and it's a question that I've been thinking about for quite some time. I think that is one of the directions that we should look at and that we should potentially pursue. One of the challenges, of course, and I think this is something that we've seen quite a bit in headless implementations, is that for developers who are building in headless environments and headless architectures, this sort of presentational data can occasionally be very limiting, even though it's something that does restore that control to a lot of our users. I think we need a multi-pronged approach, right? But the biggest thing that I want to make sure that we do is not to take away from the developer experience as well. And one of the challenges that we've seen is if you, for example, take Drupal, right? If you decide to build a headless application that's based on a layout that's defined in Drupal, right now the output you get from a layout configuration entity or some of these other entities that exist in Drupal can be a little bit challenging to work with for developers. Now also there is a notion of the fact that headless means that all presentational concerns should be limited to the headless application. So I believe that is one direction that actually we should look at and that we should look at pursuing. I think that splitting up the data into two different types so that we have a very clear separation of concerns in that regard is important. I also think, however, that we should look at other things that enable us to reach that point where we have the ability to exert more influence over the headless applications themselves. And what I mean by that is potentially there's an opportunity to introduce things like actual manifests or code within the code that we produce in these headless applications that we also have control over from the Drupal side of things. Really get more of Drupal into a lot of these presentation layers as opposed to encoding some of this stuff in the Drupal way of doing things. Now, how that looks is something that is going to be up to a lot of the smaller ecosystems within the headless Drupal community. Obviously, we have a lot of people who like Vue.js, a lot of people like React.js. What might that look like if you still want that great developer experience, if you still want those React components managed the way that you want them to be managed, but also allows for our content editors and our marketing teams to have that ability to maintain those as well. I don't have all the answers. It could be that we go in this direction or the direction of really focusing on that data separation, or we do both. But that's a conversation that I'm looking forward to having here with all of you today.
All right, well, thank you very much. One more big hand of applause. Preston, thank you very much. Here's a small kind. Thank you very much. Okay, well, they gave me one task, and that's call out the event and, of course, also call out the theme of today. And I clearly said reconnect a couple of times. That's completely wrong, because it's actually reunite. So my apologies, I was completely wrong there. Next, what we're going to do is we have a session here, featured speech on the status of Drupal 10. Then upstairs, there are breakout rooms, and at 11 o'clock sharp, all these sessions will start. If you want to go to any of the breakout rooms, you go out the door here, to the left, up the stairs, and you will find the rooms there. Thank you all for your attention now, and look forward to see you back at 11 o'clock. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.